So we're very excited, everyone here tonight. As we're waiting for the slides to come up, we're really happy that we were able to invite three guests with us here tonight to join us for this session on racism and microaggression.
So before we officially start and introduce our panelists, who's Jaclyn Wong, Coly, Chau, and Kishuan Espiritu, we would maybe go through some background about the session. This is the 8th session of our Resiliency Dialogues of Project Protect. I'm Alan Lee. I'm one of the Project Protect's research team lead. And we are very happy to have this series of workshops where we wanted to engage different community members to discuss experiences and strategies to deal with various kinds of oppression and social injustices and racism. So today we have focused talking about, racism and microaggression. And we also experimenting with a new format today. So today we are using a webinar format. So if you go to the next slide. So we wanted to, before we started, but we would appreciate if you can participate in a quick poll so we know that who are our participants. So you can see on the screen and you can just click it, the answers you think is most appropriate for you. Hmm?
Okay, everyone got a chance to do the poll?
Okay. Says you can scroll down and make sure you have all 3 questions. Okay, that sounds great.
Great.
So if I can invite Rain to introduce yourself and also do the land acknowledgement.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Rain here, one of the staff here at Project Protect. Before we begin, I'm just going to share a land acknowledgement with everyone here. With gratitude and respect, our team at Protect honors and acknowledges that we are gathered on this sacred land covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with the multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Toronto is located on a Dish with one spoon territory, which is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bounds them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and all other newcomers were invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect to share and care for the resources of this land. We are aware of the ongoing impact of colonialism, racism, and other forms of discrimination and social injustices that disproportionately impacts Indigenous people and racialized communities here on Turtle Island, aka North America. We stand in solidarity to continue our fight against anti-Indigenous, anti-Black, anti-Asian, Islamophobia, and any other forms of racism and social oppressions locally and globally.
So in order to ensure that we have a safe and constructive space to exchange our experiences and ideas, we would respectfully request that we follow certain guidelines. And so we wanted to ensure that we used a non-judgmental attitude and respect diversity and equity and social justice. And in the webinar setting, I think you could use the Q&A button at the bottom bar, or use a raise hand signal to express your wish to speak and participate. So depending on which version of the Zoom you have, you could either see a hand signal on the bottom bar, or you might need to click the participants button, and then it will open up and you would see the raise hand version. So if you can use that to express your wish to speak, and we will attend to that in order. And also you could type in chat and make your comments, and we would welcome your discussion feedback and when we go into the case scenario and discussion. So next slide. So without further ado, we'd like to pass it on to our panel of speakers. So we have a very energetic and experienced group of facilitators who've been doing a lot of exciting work in advancing social justice and understanding of anti-racism. So I'll let them introduce themselves. So Coly, Kish, and Jaclyn, do you want to quickly just introduce yourselves and then we can go into the discussion?
I guess we'll start with Coly.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So my name is Coly. I currently do research, write, and facilitate on issues of race, migration, gender sexuality, and sometimes the media. I do this within educational settings within the community, post-secondary, and nonprofit sectors. And more recently, I'm doing this work within government sector. I also want to acknowledge that I'm actually currently calling from the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh indigenous peoples. And I'm very grateful to be in this space that they have stewarded and taken care of the land for so long. I also want to acknowledge all of the other people in the room that I constantly learn, work, and organize alongside with towards the colonial and liberatory future. Just to let you know, I'm part of the Scarborough Youth United Core Committee alongside with Kishuan.
Thank you.
That's me next. Yeah, so my name is Kishuan. A lot of people just call me Kish. I use he, him pronouns. I am also a facilitator and coordinator at SYU. I like to focus on teaching kids about computer programming. We've hosted some Python workshops back in the last summer camp that we had. I like to spice it up a little bit and teach them about game development using Scratch for first-time coders. That was pretty popular and pretty fun. I've also done some workshops about gender. Yeah, thank you.
And Jaclyn.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Jaclyn. I'm really happy to be here with Kish and Coly to talk about today's topic. I go by she and her pronouns, and I'm an educator, a teacher actually working full-time with the York Region District School Board that's up in the GTA. And in the past, I've done research across Toronto as well as the province. I'm currently also holding a role with the Chinese Canadian National Council for Social Justice, and we're in the middle of and developing an anti-Asian racism resource for kids, as that's actually my audience. So I actually work with children and youth. Part of the youth work I do as well is working with a program that I co-created with the Alpha Education Organization, as well as in collaboration with the Chinese Canadian National Council Toronto chapter, focusing on issues in East Asian communities, and it's targeted to East Asian identifying youth. That's just a little bit about me. Yeah, I can also recognize, similar to Coly, I'm currently residing on Treaty 13A, which we know as Toronto. That's about me for now. And I look forward to having this conversation with folks.
Great, thank you and welcome. So we'll start with our first scenario, which are Coly and Kish has prepared for us. You wanna take it away?
Yeah, sure thing. So I will just read out.
Yeah,
the
so
case
we
scenario.
have the slide as well, if you can put that up. So this is based on your actual experience, right? Working with your community, right? Yes. So can you tell us a little bit more about like the Scarborough Youth United? Who do you serve and like how long has it been around and all that as a background?
Yeah, so just to let everyone know, Scarborough Youth United is a collective that started over a year ago. We're a very loose collective of people, a grassroots group, and what we do is we want to create space for working class Southeast and East Asian youth, particularly in Scarborough, but also within the GTA and also outside of the GTA. We really want to create space where youth are able to find their strength in their own lived experiences, share our collective concerns, and work collectively to address those concerns. We really do want to create spaces where it's accessible and culturally relevant for the youth, and also find ways that are culturally relevant and accessible to address the concerns that we see within our communities. We strive to understand our connectedness to each other and to those outside of the communities, as well as focusing on intergenerational learning. And also we want to instill practices that follow Indigenous leadership as respectful guests on Dish with One Spoon territory, the land where Scarborough is currently situated.
So should we post the slide for your scenario? Okay, there we are.
I'll be happy to read it out loud for everyone. So this is the case scenario. This is actually based off a real event that happened in our organization. So John immigrated from China to Canada 2 years ago with his wife Jane and son Alex. John and Jane are frontline workers. John works as a security guard and Jane is a personal support worker. They are exhausted after their shifts and have little energy to engage with their son Alex. To keep Alex busy, they enrolled him in the Scarborough Youth United winter break camp after hearing about it through a friend. Near the end of the camp, during a community parent-teacher feedback session, John expressed deep concerns about his child being taught topics such as anti-Black racism and Black Lives Matter. John shared that because he was unfamiliar with the topic, he didn't know how to explain this topic to Alex. John felt that it was unfair for Alex to be overwhelmed with such stressful content that would push him to the point of tears. To John, he's more concerned about his son learning about anti-Asian racism, especially during the pandemic. John stated, anti-Asian racism is worse than anti-Black racism. In the following session, Alex appears very influenced by his father's opinion. He further shares that after watching a lot of YouTube and talking to his online friends through Valorant, a video game, Alex came to the conclusion that Black Lives Matter is a hoax.
So before, I guess, you help us to unpack the scenario further, maybe we want to kind of get a sense from our audience, how they might respond. So we have a poll questions. The first question is, if you were in the community parent-teacher feedback session, what would you do? So there's no right or wrong answer. You just pick whatever you think is, applicable for you. They can also click multiple answers. And it's okay if you're not sure what to do. That's one of the options. So we'll give a moment for everybody to vote.
Do you want to share the screen again so that they can look back at the scenario?
So yeah, oftentimes these cases that we put up are complicated cases. They're not easy. So there are really like no right or wrong answers. We want to be able to have a discussion around the complexity of these issues.
Okay, so I think most people have responded. Should we carry on?
Okay.
Is there a second question?
Yes.
Okay, so why don't we post up this second question as well?
Share.
No. So both questions been posted?
Yeah, and then this is the second question.
Okay. So the second question is, what are some of the longer term approaches if you're the facilitator, mentor at SYU in this situation? What would you do? Again, you can choose multiple answers and there is no one right answer.
So we have someone making a comment saying that they're surprised that this scenario isn't the other way around. And so we can talk about that later as we're talking about this in this discussion. We can definitely unpack that.
Okay, we're almost done.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So, do you want to share?
I think the panelists can see the response, right?
I don't have access to it. Oh, now I do.
Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, I hope my audio is better.
Oh, much better. Yes, thank you.
Right, okay, sorry about before. So thank you so much, everyone, for responding to this. And I wanted to share that we did want to share this case, not to demonize anyone or to demonize the situation or to place blame on anyone. But we wanted to just address the nuances of the situation. As Rain said, it is very complex. As SYU as a collective, we also don't know the exact right answer. What we do know is that we can try different approaches. And so, as I said before, SYU is a loose collective. And the beautiful thing about it, it has been so organic working alongside others. We're all just trying to learn through the process and really aim to try different things out and aim to facilitate different resources and tools. So one of the things that we really wanted to focus on was in this situation, there were definitely short-term things in both of the scenarios at the parent-teacher feedback session and during the sessions with Alex and other students. So we're just going to go through some of the approaches that we're trying out and we're trying out so we can address some of the issues that arose. I'm going to let Kishuan start.
So as one of the answers in the poll and at the forefront of what we like to do at our organization is about teaching youth about empathy, tolerance, and compassion. And the way in which we do that is by exposing youth to diverse peoples to increase their awareness about them. Firstly, our makeup of the SYU collective is very diverse. Being youth-centered, we are made up of various members of different age groups, youth and non-youth of different backgrounds and from all across Canada. Yet we are united with one goal, to enable youth in realizing their power and potential. And in addition to our diverse collective, we also like to invite guest speakers to share their stories and bring up conversations about things like racism and microaggression. We've had speakers such as Judy Cho, Kai Cheng Tom, Alaska B, Kobe Song Nicholas, and we aim to educate youth about people from all walks of life, from Indigenous history and land acknowledgements to gender, misogyny, and ableism. Personally, what I've brought forth to SYU is sharing my experience about living as a transgender person, the importance about introducing yourself with your pronouns, and talking about things like misogyny. By providing opportunities that allow youth to build relationships and learn from others, we create a space that is built on empathy. And SYU also allows youth to collaborate and be mentored by our members, strengthening not only our own sense of community, but to realize that we're all much more similar than we are different. I'd like to pass on the next point to Coly.
So one of the points on the poll was providing workshops for the youth on racism and media to debunk these myths. And that's something else that we have been doing and we want to continue doing, whether through its workshops. We have done tutoring sessions for youth throughout the pandemic, particularly for youth whose parents are frontline workers, for example, like Alex's parents. We've done it through our camps and other projects like our Photo Voice project. We really want anti-racism education that centers their experiences. So their lived experiences, their identities, so that they understand what oppression, racism, microaggressions is, or what they are through a personal connection. And we also want to provide historical context for migration as to why we are on Turtle Island, why they're raced or why they're racialized people, but more importantly, to understand that in relationship to others, other bodies and other experiences. And so we do this not only to, we don't want to just instill empathy and compassion so that they are trying to understand other people, but we want them to understand, to have that empathy and compassion for themselves as well as youth. So we hope to give them the vocabulary to understand what their experiences are, to name whatever has happened in their lives. So one of the examples was in the summer, I provided anti-racism workshop with high schoolers for the Photo Voice project. And it was in these instances where a lot of youth, they were recalling things that happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago. For example, one student shared how they were constantly asked, "Where are you from? Why do you speak with an accent?" Or being someone in a drama class using the words ching chong to them. And so finally being able to kind of address, oh, that moment was racist, or that moment was a form of microaggression. And so really giving them that vocabulary. We also wanted them to understand racism and microaggressions in relationships to others, as I said. And why we want to do this is we want to dismantle those hierarchies of oppression. So for example, in that instance where we're seeing anti-Asian racism as more important than anti-Black racism, we kind of want them to understand the common roots of racism and oppression. So for example, understanding white supremacy in those cases. We also want them to kind of really be able to pinpoint that racialized bodies are also able to perpetuate microaggressions, or people who of different identities are able to perpetuate microaggressions. And so in an instance where we had a guest speaker, a youth asked the guest speaker who was East Asian, "Where are you from?" And so like really taking time to break that down and having a conversation about how that perpetuates anti-Asian racism, but also perpetuating that Asian people don't belong in this space, similar to their own identities. And lastly, I want to share that we do want to talk to youth about media. And I want to acknowledge Jaclyn. Jaclyn and I have worked on creating a workshop that I have been able to facilitate to the youth, but I've also worked with other people within SYU Collective, so like Angela and Tatiana, shout outs to them, where we're talking about what media is and the powers of it, and how we're able to, how race microaggressions can be portrayed through media and social media, and the impacts that they ultimately have on people. So really creating those opportunities to, for them to understand the power of media, their connections to it, but also understand that they also have the ability to produce media.
Wow, thank you for sharing all that.
So, so in the actual, maybe before Jaclyn.
Sorry, we have a few more points.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, sorry, we were just gonna jump back and forth between Kishuan and I.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, we just wanted to quickly talk about. I'll try to make it quick about like some of the other points that we had. We think that it's also very important in this case scenario that John, Jane, and Alex have clear communication with each other, and what we try to do is at SYU, we try to make that happen by creating these workshops where they can really talk to each other and plan out strategies where they can talk about the racism that they experience and the racism that other people experience and understand that it's not about, like who is experiencing more racism, but that the fact that racism is a thing and that we can all work together in dismantling that, whether systematically or within ourselves. So we like to create space for engagement by also recognizing that there are very complex family dynamics, especially with immigrant families, and COVID 19 has really emphasized that. So, since the start of the pandemic, engaging with students in our online tutoring program has allowed us to identify and hear about many concerns of parents and their unique family situations, many of whom are frontline workers, so security guards, caregivers, grocery store clerks, and we've seen that these issues have existed long before the pandemic, but have been exacerbated due to COVID 19, whether it be through things like intergenerational conflict due to cultural barriers, single parent households, low income status, migration status. And these are all things that come together and they affect everybody's overall mental health, which would, affect Jane, John, and Alex all together. These compounded with experiences of microaggression and racism that manifest consciously and subconsciously can transform into trauma that affect their relationships with the child, producing conflict and can impact the child's development. So, like I said before, we want to create an open conversation to hear and be heard. So like I said before, we've created a series of workshops where parents can create an open dialogue, and we want to address the different traumas, including experience with microaggressions that have been perpetuated in their daily lives, and discuss how they may have been perpetuating microaggressions themselves. So we adhere to an anti-oppressive and empowering framework. We like to do value-based parenting instead of goal-based parenting, and brainstorming parent-child communication strategies like setting realistic expectations, listening, respect, and validation.
So sorry, we just wanted to actually, the options in the poll, we actually wanted to share that even though some people didn't select them, we have been trying those as approaches to addressing this issue as well. So we just have a few more points, and so just alongside what Kishuan just said about facilitating workshops specifically for parents, we also facilitate workshops for youth to kind of understand their relationship with their family and parents. So we've done that throughout our all of our programming, and we just want to enable youth to kind of learn from mentors, particularly other East and Southeast Asian mentors, so older youths or non-youths, how they've also navigated these difficult conversations and these sometimes intergenerational conflicts. So we want to equip youth, not necessarily with I don't want to say we're giving them entire skills to navigate that, but we want to create space where they can feel that supported by others, whether it's the peers or mentors, and so that they can actually have difficult conversations with their family members and address the intergeneral experiences with microaggression and racism. One of the examples that has been brought up is, for example, even during COVID, intergenerational conflicts with practices of wearing a mask, where, for example, a youth or parent thinks that it's not important and the other one thinks it's important. And so creating those opportunities for them to kind of have these conversations. Kishuan, you have something else?
Yeah, so one thing that like kind of takes more an indirect approach, as you can see, like from that case scenario that we talked about, Alex was very influenced by many different opinions, and he was kind of confused and pretty overwhelmed that um, there is so much racism in the world and so much hatred, and we want to help them navigate through that, like Coly said, by providing leadership opportunities and skills for youth in Scarborough to take action in their community. So we do that by gauging community needs first. we care deeply about the youth we serve, and in order to address their needs adequately, we provide them with resources to succeed. So right now, I'm conducting a needs assessment survey that is led by the advocacy team and a group of student research assistants. So we take a learn and teach approach by examining the community and the unique challenges of racialized youth. We work closely with our survey's target population to ensure that we are asking the right questions. And we also use this as an opportunity for the student researchers to hone their skills, learn leadership through mentoring, embracing their identities and engaging in communities they identify with, which in turn will help them to build a successful career in the future. And we want them to definitely be comfortable in their own stances and thoughts, to develop their own values and become critical of the things that they're told, to become critical of the information they absorb. And by doing that, we learn about the target population's needs while also mentoring them and preparing them with skills that they can use later in the workplace.
And sorry,
So,
one last
um,
point. Are we over
okay.
time? Sorry.
No, it's fine. I just
So
wanted to mention that someone had asked the questions, how they can enroll their youth into it. So I just put it into the chat, the website for Scarborough Youth, so that people can find out more about it. But go on.
thank you, Rain. So one of the last point, which I noticed no one selected, was centering academic skills and supports. And so first and foremost, like Scarborough Youth United, we really do value those. And we value academic skills and supports, but also extracurricular activities. So things are entertaining, informative, educational, such as our monthly movie club. We also have information panels on post-secondary education. And so we want to actually like combine all of these as part of that multi-pronged approach to addressing this case and actually just racism and microaggressions in general. But when we provide academic skills like tutoring and workshops on English, math, film, French, history, computer programming, but we do this alongside social justice topics. So we want them to leverage and build new skills. And this is also to kind of address the income and class differences that actually, for example, for frontline workers and their kids, they don't have the opportunity to give their kids additional supports. So this is part of what we want to tackle. We also want to show youth and their parents that the curriculums that are taught, they're not taught in silos and they're actually complementary. So for example, Kishuan teaching computer programming, but we pair that with understanding gender. So when we kind of combine it so that we can kind of explore these things together. We also invite parents to some of these events, such as our movie clubs and also our post-secondary educational panels. And firstly, this is creating space where, for example, for first generation post-secondary students whose immigrants' parents haven't gone through the post-secondary system here, really providing them what knowledge about what all that is. And so part of that is addressing that the inherent systemic racisms that prevent immigrant families and their children from having this sort of supports and knowledge. So that's also something that we want to do. And again, I think just to reiterate, when we combine all of these, we're able to address the racism that prevents particularly certain racialized communities from having not only academic supports, but also political and racial education. And of course, we understand that this type of system or this type of programming that SYU provides is actually deeply rooted in not only our experiences currently, but also rooted in the decades and centuries of organizing by Chinese and Asian people to address oppression, but also that we've learned so much from Black, Indigenous, and other racialized and other gendered people in how we come up with academic supports and programs and all of our programming to support youth. So really like wanting to stress that this type of work is actually deeply indebted to what we also learn outside of our community. So that's about it. Sorry, a lot of rambling. And I think I saw a question about how do we encourage parents to enroll their children into SYU is we use all of those approaches, and we hope that some of those kind of speak to the parents and speak to the youth and why they want to show up.
I guess, like, if I may ask the question, so as you mentioned that a lot of the parents who are frontline workers have very limited time. So I guess like all of those programs and activities are really meaningful and engaging, and I think it does really get at the deeper issues and help the understanding. I guess like I personally find that a lot of times that people didn't really give us the time of day enough to engage in those meaningful experiential exchange and discussion, right? So I guess what would be the first thing that help engage and continue that conversation, like if in that scenario, for example, given that John and Jane might not really have the time or ability to attend like various workshops or meetings, and so what would you do or have been done to successfully engage them and ensure, first of all, they don't pull Alex out of the camp, right?
Yeah, so if you don't mind me answering part of this, feel free to add. From what I've interpreted is that SYU likes to start with the youth. So we like to kind of bring them together, but we really let the youth take the initiative by different things about leadership, engaging with the community to reconcile these intergenerational conflicts. So what we would try to do is to encourage Alex to reach out to his parents and really have those conversations when they have the time at home, because it all starts at home, and we just provide and leverage those skills so that those kinds of difficult conversations can be made and that they can strengthen their relationship with each other.
I think I would also add just Kishuan did talk about like us having the parent sessions, and we don't have that like regularly, but we do try to incorporate that even throughout the camp. So like even if the youth were in the camp for X amount of weeks, we try to at least incorporate a few drop-in sessions where parents can kind of connect with us. But also what's so great about working with so many other people, our core committee at SYU is about 20 people. And so we have people actually like messaging people on WhatsApp or WeChat just to follow up with them. And we even throughout the camp, we have like one-on-one meetups with the youth as well, so that we can understand if there's anything happening within their family, so that we can also reach out. So really like trying to, almost like triangulate the relationship where it's like the parents, the students, and us, we're all kind of in this together.
Wow, these are really great things, topics that you've mentioned, and all the amazing work that SYU is doing. I just want to bring it back to the question we had earlier from Kishuan regarding the scenario. I don't know if Kishuan, you had more comments to make about what you mentioned in the chat. If you wanted to add more to your thoughts. If not, that's okay too. No, okay. So very quickly before we move on and to our next speaker, does anyone, any participants have any questions or comments about some of what we've just said so far?
So maybe we can ask Jaclyn to also comment on the scenario.
Yeah, go ahead, Jaclyn.
Yeah, and I think for folks who are doing this work or have been doing this work for a while, I actually don't think it's a a surprise. Anti-Blackness is quite prevalent in Chinese communities and Asian identifying communities. So to be honest, it's not quite a surprise. I've heard plenty of stories in the school board among young children and teenagers in high schools where, there's, not one, but many instances where, there's a Black student who would, relating back to the pandemic, they would call out for fun to a Chinese student, coronavirus, and then the next few moments or at another day, you would just see the microaggressions that the Chinese or the Asian student would inflict on the Black student, not letting them join any games or activities, leaving them out and singling them out in activities. And so for me to see this, especially in a Chinese prevalent or Chinese predominant community such as Markham, the anti-Blackness is not, it's not a surprise to me. I will say because of that, I think that's a great segue to actually emphasize in segue of Kish and Coly have what shared. Context matters. I think we need to talk about how the context matters in how students learn. And so I think we need to remember that students are in a institutionalized Eurocentric system. So, if you're going to talk to them about race, if we want more students to engage in conversations about race and racism, will they even see it? Will they even see and recognize race? Will they even identify as Chinese or as Asian or whichever background? And sadly, I, as a special education teacher right now for junior and intermediate students, the activities I've done, and as well as with high school students too, there is a very huge gap of not even acknowledging that they're Chinese. Like, this is what whiteness, this is what white supremacy and institutions have done to us. They have washed us out of our identities. So if we're going to talk about racism, we do need to talk about these cultural pieces as well, and just even understand what race is, right? Like, you want to just talk about racism, but if you want them to call out the racism on themselves and it's for other folks, if you want the children and youth to talk about solidarity, they have to recognize that there's a racial hierarchy that they live in right now. Like, the systems we live in are as part of the mechanisms of whiteness and white supremacy, it's blinded us and made us ignorant of these issues. So I'm really happy to hear, Kish and Coly talking about, critical media literacy or developing critical thinking skills or questioning. I think that's part of what anti-oppression or anti-oppressive education is, doing that questioning piece. I'll also say, as part of context, and I'll do a shout out to my friend Joy here, but she recommended, I had listened to someone named Professor Thema Bryant Davis. She's a psychologist in the States. And I think a piece that I want to throw out there is also, if we want to do this work in, dismantling the systems and, educating students on anti-oppression, we have to do the work ourselves too. I think we need to really bring it back to us. And so I just want to throw this out there for any practitioners or teachers or social workers out there. If we're not doing the work on us, we can't really introduce and engage students in these kind of conversations. Dr. Thema Bryant Davis, she's a psychologist and therapist, and she was saying how a client had asked her, am I beautiful? And, Bryant Davis, who identifies as Black, she was astounded at the question, but then she was thinking, what, if I didn't do that, if I didn't unpack and do that work and I had to answer that question, it's just showing how we just continue to perpetuate everything that's, the institutions and the systems have taught us to do. We can't really undo that work if we haven't done this work ourselves. So I want to just put that out there because as anti-oppressive educators, we should be doing this work as ourselves as well. My other piece out there as part of context is also that intersectional piece of us as adults. We definitely have a lot more resources, you know, whether it's people or money or whatnot. You know, I hear heartbreaking stories of children who are grade 8 or in high school who they don't like their therapist. They don't think it's you know, either it's not culturally responsive. I could tell, you know, they don't know that word, but I could tell that they're not culturally responsive. Their parents force them, you know, and it's it's part of that. And sorry, I lost my train of thought here, but I'm thinking because it was very emotional because when I was listening to the student and my heart was just it was so tight because I was just listening to this kid who was like, oh yes, being the kind of privilege that adults hold is that she couldn't afford to go to she had to depend on her parents to drive her to the therapist that she doesn't want. And I asked her, like, do you have bus money? Do you have anything? She's like, nope, I have nothing. I have to go to the therapist that my my parents and guardians have imposed on. So I'm just thinking as for children and youth, they're much more vulnerable, and I think we need to really emphasize this piece of our privilege as older folks. So a generational. I'm really glad again, as Coly and Kish have brought up, the generational issues are so important to talk about, especially among Asian communities. And I'm really glad to hear there's that kind of piece around equipping students, equipping children and youth with those kind of social skills and advocacy and agency skills to ask for help, but also understand with the empathy piece that their parents are another generation too. You know, such a funny story here, a little anecdote. You know, I told my mom that at the very last minute that I'm doing this talk, and my mom's like, why are you talking about racism? It's so sensitive. I was like, you know, my mom doesn't understand why I have to talk about race or racism. You know, she's a baby boomer. So again, it's like, I'm just very grateful. I've had mentors and circles of support who are able to help me navigate this piece or unpacking and unlearning these pieces. So I think we have to provide these spaces for, Scarborough Youth United. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just also wanted to not forget to address some questions that are typed in the chat. There's 2 so far. Someone asked a question: to understand racial hierarchy in Canada, do you feel it is useful to know about Chinese Canadian history, or is it enough to contextualize to current generations? That's a very good question. And then the second question I'll ask before we launch into answering is, someone wanted to know how to spell the name of this therapist.
Yeah, sure.
Only caught Davis part.
Yeah, I can fit.
Davis? No, something about Davis. They said that they missed. Sorry?
Thema.
So Jaclyn's gonna type it in the.
Yeah, she's a womanist psychologist. Okay. Yeah, she's got great YouTube stuff. You can just go into that rabbit hole and just
Amazing. Let's get back to that question. I think this is a really great question about Chinese Canadian history, or is it enough to contextualize current generation? That's a big question. So I don't know. Go ahead. Anyone can start.
Yeah, people also can raise hand and want to speak. You know, we can unmute you and let you speak as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we can definitely let you talk. Don't worry. So please let us know.
Yeah, I'll invite Coly or Kish to answer that, and I'm happy to listen. Unless you want me to answer. Okay.
I'm just waiting who wants to go first.
I can share that, like, just to go back to when I was talking about the type of anti-racism education that we try to provide. And I had 90 minutes, and I actually wanted to go back to the beginning of, like, to the beginning, before pre-colonization in Turtle Island, so Canada. And I really try to fit that in because I can personally share that for the last 10 years of me trying to understand race, I have had to not only understand, like, not only contextualize my current experience, but understand the historical experiences of those that preceded me, but also those not within my communities. So understanding the whole, like the histories of not just Chinese Canadians, but understanding the histories of Black Indigenous people, other racialized, other Asians, other like understanding global history almost, just to understand what colonization has done to create the systems, like the current racist systems that exist today. And I think it's not just understanding our own history, but understanding everything, to understand how they're all connected, how they're interconnected. And so, yeah, I think even like what Jaclyn was saying, that's so important for practitioners and educators themselves to understand that in order for you to have these conversations with youth. Yeah.
I'd
Yeah,
also like to
absolutely.
add.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I heard this saying a lot, especially like when I was in elementary and high school. They would say things that history tends to repeat itself, and that really goes to show that it's really important to learn about our past, about Chinese Canadian history, so that not only can we contextualize what's happening today, but to see, like what Coly said, how it systematically affected us, all of these legacies. It's not as a way to hold grudges and to continue a legacy of hatred, but to understand what happened, and also to have a look at our culture, and to be proud of where we came from, of where we've been, whether it's something that is really difficult to look back to. um, and I think that we should have a lot of pride in how far we've come, and how I think like we tend to consume ourselves with how bad the world is at the like right now, the state of the world. But I think looking back at history and seeing now the progress that we've made, I think there's definitely a lot of work, but I'm really happy to see where we've come. I'm very proud to be of Chinese and Filipino heritage. Unfortunately, I think like the Chinese part of my family has assimilated. It sucks because I think I would have been really connected if I learned the language. I know Tagalog, which has helped me to understand my own culture on the Filipino side, to see the way that they think, why they think the way that they do, and just to have like that general appreciation for cultures and other cultures, and also growing up in Canadian society.
Do you have anything else to add, Jaclyn, as well?
Yeah, I think it just goes back to the first point about the context again matters. I think part of understanding history piece too is how, we can talk about racism and microaggressions that Chinese and Asian identifying folks are experiencing here in Canada, and then we go into the historical pieces of we can look at the patterns of how the model minority myth has came in and out of across Canada, right? We can also go into conversations of I saw a comment somewhere in the chat about that kind of diaspora where I have a background that's still where my ancestors have where I identify where my ancestors have come from southern China. There's that part where and Hong Kong as well, is that in some other places and spaces in the world, my community or the people who represent me are they've also been in the position of as oppressors as well, right? Like if we're going to talk about the transnational piece here, I can keep talking about me being victimized in Canada in such a way, but at the same time, there's a lot of this privilege that I hold being in Canada and being Asian, being light skinned, being someone who doesn't speak with an accent. History history helps us learn, and as well as the current issues, historical and current issues help us build that awareness. And so I'm still unpacking and unlearning. Like there's so much history in Asia that I don't know if I'll be able to learn all that in my lifetime, but I mean, at least I can question it and can keep thinking and using the history as what Kish said, to not repeat those history mistakes and whatnot. So yeah, very, very important. I guess the only thing I'll add is I'm being mindful of time is I'm sure I would like Coly and Kish to finish, but I'm very grateful for bringing up this case. I think the piece around what was it? This empathy, compassion, and tolerance piece. I want to contextualize that to say that I immigrated here when I was I immigrated here in the 80s. I was gonna like age myself. Okay, but I will say that in terms of currently in the public school board, for anyone who is right now working with children and youth, but right now in the school board, and it has been for a few decades, because I remember this when I was young, is that there's this character building piece. There's this character building piece that's, to me, we have to question, we have to challenge that. And so when I hear empathy, compassion, and tolerance, I'm definitely embracing of all of those values. At the same time, the public school board has, or at least our school systems have used these, I guess, ideas or ideologies to tell us that everything's okay. Like as long as you just need to empathize and you're fine. You don't need to challenge the system, or you'll be awarded for helping a kid for the day, and this character building process is still happening today, because I see that today as a teacher. So just being mindful of, we can throw these ideas around, but there's that critical piece that needs to happen. So I'm not worried that Scarborough Youth United's not doing is not doing that. I'm sure you are, but it has to be simultaneous. We can't just rely on education around empathy and compassion. There's this critical compassion, or whatever you want to call it. There needs to be an action of challenging and changing the status quo.
Great. Thank you for all that. We have, I know we're crunching time here. We have one more question. I don't know, maybe Coly and Kish can take like a few seconds to answer this. Regarding how does knowledge impact Asian ethnic and individual identity and self-esteem with younger people in mind?
I think I'll start. Make it really quick since I know that we're a little tight on time. But just to give you like a little background with myself, I was born in Scarborough and raised here, and it was interesting to live with two different cultures. The culture that I had at home, and then the culture that I was exposed to outside, and I witnessed and lived in that interconnectedness, and it is really important to learn more about it and to understand it in terms of like being like an Asian, and also with your own individual identity, because to um, it helps you to almost like to definitely debunk these myths that you grow up with. I was raised with like a lot of anti-Black sentiment, a lot of colonial mentality. Um, when the Philippines was conquered by Spain, there was a lot of emphasis on being light-skinned, and you're poor if you're darker skinned, and to hear that and to have that issue on self-esteem, to think, oh, in order to look good, I need to be lighter. I need to be like this, and I need to look a certain way so that I can be more validated as a person, more respected, and it really confused me because I I felt I felt that like I was raised with like a lot of these racist beliefs, but what helped me to gain that compassion and to see that we're a lot more similar than we are different is because I'm thankful that that I grew up here, and I was able to meet people of different races, of different cultural backgrounds, and to see, oh, these different stereotypes that I was told about them is definitely not true. And these stereotypes perpetuated against me, I know is not true. And we see that there is a root in white supremacy of a colonial mentality where this comes from, and to know that different races are not our enemy, and that we can work together to dismantle the system that has been so oppressive for decades and decades. Yeah.
So
Any final?
I have a burning question. Actually, I maybe that would be a kind of a good question for us to share some parting thoughts since our time is running out. So I think actually a lot of from what the participants are also sharing, that I think we are pretty much all on the same page. We are all very committed to social justice and anti-racism and anti-oppression and solidarity building. I guess, like, in at the risk of not just preaching to the converted, I would like to challenge us to maybe think about what was the point in our lives when we actually started to have that passion and commitment to explore, the critical analysis, that we wanted to understand our history. We want to understand and unpack colonialism and different forms of oppression, because that is against all the social conditioning that we were brought up, right? So there must be something in us or in our experience. And I think it would be very helpful for me to learn about, whether you have that kind of epiphany or whatever you call it, that kind of motivate you to take on this path, which is, like, I think it's so inspiring to see so many younger people so committed to these values and stuff. So I really wanted to understand and know more about it. So if I can propose that as our parting thoughts, that might be very exciting for me.
And also, as you're thinking about answers, folks, someone had asked, what are some additional resources to explore this topic? So feel free to type it into the chat if you have any suggestions.
Mm-hmm. So I guess one of our participants is sharing that the things that inspired them is the Hong Kong protests.
Hong Kong protests, yeah, for sure. I know that the Hong Kong protests have piqued a lot of interest within the Hong Kong community, which I think Hong Kongers, is interesting, because I remember there was a time when Hong Kong folks were not as political, but now they're very political. So it's very interesting to see that shift. Before all you speakers, I don't know if you want to answer Alan's question, or if you thought of something. I want to also add, since you're thinking, just to make it really intersectional, like, I always find myself very torn between my identity as a queer and trans person versus my identity as a racialized person. And that's never going to end. I often feel a lot more supported. To be honest, I often do feel a lot more supported with my queer and trans identity within the Western communities than I do within the Asian culture, Asian communities, and that hasn't gone away yet. So that's an intersectional piece that we have a long, long way to unpack. Anyway, I'll give it back to you both, all three of you now.
So our panelist?
I'm writing in the
Okay.
additional resource questions. So Coly and Kish, you can.
We could also post it in the video after.
Okay.
So let's share your thoughts for now. Maybe Coly was ready to speak, I think.
I'm just like, pull all the resources. Okay, go ahead, Coly.
I think it goes back to, I want to go back to, something that Jaclyn said about the empathy and compassion. And then, I think what we want to focus on is also not just empathy and compassion for yourself and trying to understand your relationship to others, but also understand, wait, you're really complicit in that oppression as well. And so it's a very mixed, it'll be a very confusing, and especially I think of it from my personal experience. When the moment it hit me about complicity, but also that I myself have I myself and my family and the generations before me have experienced harm. And so I would say, like, for me, the moment that I kind of came to realize this was like, I actually had an opportunity, actually, so a Black woman, actually, her name is Erica Allen. She's from the States, and she actually facilitated Spates. And about like almost 10 years ago, that was when I was able to actually process all of that at once. And I think after that, after I was able to let all that confusion come out, I actually had to dive really deep in and learn every single thing about myself. And that also meant like returning back to my homeland and visiting family that were estranged. And for me, like, I don't think that it's like, I'm not prescribing this to anyone, but for me, that was like a moment for me where I was like, oh my gosh, my whole world is upside down. And I think with Erica Allen, like what she left me with was like, it's okay. Like, it's okay that your world feels upside down, and that I was able to name things that happened as a child. I grew up in suburban Montreal where I was the only Asian person. And so like dealing with that, and I think for the next 10 years after that, like working through it, and I'm still working through it, and I'm working alongside Jaclyn, Kish, Rain, all of you. So like, that's what I can share has been my experience.
Thank you.
So just before people leave, you can keep talking, but just before people leave, we're just gonna put this poll up.
Okay. Maybe I really still do want to hear from Kish and Jaclyn though.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Unmute yourself first though. Thanks, Coly. Yeah, Jaclyn, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, I can go. Yeah, I think it's a whole mix of things. Definitely, there was a bit of, I guess it would be around maybe undergrad, where there was this tension I've always had as someone who identifies female, and that I was always feeling not wronged, but always there was this overwhelming sense of like false sense of confidence I had in myself, and it made me reflect from everything from as you know, as I was from when I was young all the way till just around undergrad, where it was this tension that I started recognizing between myself and male identifying folks. And then this was compounded with my brother, who tried to end his life in 2009. And so this mix of mental health issues that my family, it was basically threw me in the deep end of understanding the intense amount of whiteness and white supremacy in institutions, really got me thinking about how I'm in this racial hierarchy. And so that just really, and it's unfortunate that I have to be, it's unfortunate that trauma has to be the piece that got me triggering all these thoughts and emotions. And I'm not afraid of showing my tears at this moment, because that's part of who I am. And I think part of it too is the educational piece, where I've had family members, giving me very microaggression kind of points about, you're a female, so you can't do this or that. And so there's this kind of, again, intersectional piece of, with a mix of race, being female, being someone who has been put down a lot, and also the false sense of confidence. I remember how traumatic it was to do presentations during undergrad, and the amount of anxiety at University of Toronto. It was so overwhelming that I never understood it. And it was only until I acknowledged and embraced my Chinese identity that I was liberated from this false sense of confidence. It was grounding and rooting myself and knowing who I was. And so I'm a firm believer in understanding that race and all the intersectional pieces play a very significant role in one's confidence. And so whoever asked that question, it is very important to really unpack and do that work to know who you are, to really come to a sense of authentic and genuine confidence. And this kind of it just washed over me to know that I can be confident in who I am, but also being okay with not knowing things too. And this turn of, you know, I ground and I ground myself in just these pieces of me knowing who I am and embracing the unknown to do my work. So I don't I trust myself in the decisions I make now. I trust my gut. I trust my intuition, and I'm coming to this. I've come to the point where I don't want generations and future children and youth to be needing trauma to learn about this stuff. Like, we should be doing anti-oppressive education from the start. And so they can undo this work of trauma from the beginning, as opposed to as a 20-something-year-old, like everything crashing down to me and having to do the work. And I felt like small again. I felt like grade 1, having to relearn all this stuff. And the shock of me realizing how complicit I've been is, while it's confounding, it is also liberating to know. And actually, for those who are out there, it's actually quite the ironic thing is that you feel more liberated knowing how much you've been, you know, although it's uncomfortable, it's embracing that discomfort that is so free for me, and knowing that I have such that responsibility to do this work. So it's all of that solidified for me, and I put my 2 feet standing on those kind of values for me. And so I'm very happy to just be here to have these conversations and to ask that question. I didn't mean to bring up trauma, but I think I think you've asked the question, Alan. So there you go.
Thank
Okay,
you so much.
trauma is very
Yes.
trauma is very real, right? So thanks for making it real for us. Sorry, go ahead, Alan.
I guess that's what makes us resilient. And I think one of my friends who shared the thought with me was that, you know, like, it's great that we are resilient, but we shouldn't have to be resilient because all this oppression and trauma shouldn't exist in the first place, right? So I think that's a very telling thing. And I think, but I just want to make sure that Kish and also maybe Cindy, if you want to share, we want to just make sure you have the space to do that before we finish our forum. And then we also want to acknowledge some of the participants who've been sharing their experience in the chat. That's much appreciated as well. So Kish?
Yeah, we've talked about some very heavy topics, but are very essential to really understand and like inform ourselves about all of these different kinds of things. Thank you, Jaclyn, for your words, and thank you, Coly, as well. Honestly, I've been a little bit like, I've been so deep into what they were saying that I forgot what the original question was. Did you wanna repeat that?
So I guess like I just wanted to know what have motivated us to take on this path of social justice and committing to, you know, all this really hard but rewarding work of, you know, anti-oppression, right? So I think, yeah.
I think maybe to give you guys a little context, I will tell you a short story. So I got my first job at Tim Hortons, and I was 14 at the time, and I worked with a lot of immigrants from all over the world who were trying to make their way into Canada to bring their families over, sponsor them, and I felt so much pride for them. I felt so happy for them that they were working so hard. But I was also like very sad that they were separated from their families. And I had so much respect for them and I learned so much from them. But I found that there was a lot of self hatred within themselves, um, because of their want to be accepted by the white community, as one of the comments in the panel. And one thing that really opened my eyes to that was this one time where there was this white man who was smiling at me very hard, like he was so happy. Um, and I was wondering what it was. And he spoke up and he said, "You don't sound like them. You're really good at English. And he was like speechless because I could speak English very well compared to my coworkers, and that really got me to feel like, oh wow, I can't believe, like that kind of microaggression perpetuated against me, and to imagine that the way that this person might have been treating my coworkers if they were serving him coffee instead of me. And it really wanted me to set on this path to show them how much that they should be proud of their culture, that they shouldn't hide their accent, and to be proud and to not want to blend in all the time, but to be happy with um, who they are. And I really want to do that, especially with youth, because they have to grow up in a world where it's still like this. And yeah, like being so young and experiencing that, this is one of like very minor incidents, but it was like a wake up call to me, and how I can support, even though I'm not an immigrant myself, but my parents are, and I've worked and lived with a lot of other immigrants to help empower them as people and all of us together.
So thank you so much, Kish, Coly, and Jaclyn, and our team and our participants. It's been a really moving journey, and I think by sharing, the challenges we face, and some of those are very traumatic, some of them are really witnessing um, trauma and injustice vicariously. All of the and a lot of that is also confronting our own privilege and being able to deal with the intersectional marginalization that sometimes our privilege might help us to mask and ignore and deny. Um, that sometimes set us up to really take on the paths of exploring these deeper values and things that are really important to us. So I'm really, really appreciate for your sharing, both your thoughtfulness, insights, but also your openness and vulnerability and courage to share this really experience. So we just want to thank everyone on behalf of PluTech, and we wanted to invite you back next week for another resiliency dialogue discussion, which will focus on the challenges facing the business community as a result of the pandemic. And then 2 weeks from now, we would have some of our youth panelists back to talk about the impact on youth on the pandemic, right? Right?
Yes. And so for the speakers, if you want to just hang on for a bit after participants leave so that we can just do a quick